Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to go over how you can add a timer that will display across every Qualtrics page at once. Now, this question was brought up by Kara on this video about auto advance and time tracking, and she asked, can you add one overall timer that shows up regardless of what page a person is on? And the answer is yes. You can do this, but it does require a little bit of coding, a little bit of a technical background. What I'll try to do is make it as bite-sized as possible so that the JavaScript and HTML elements you will include in your survey to have this aren't too complicated. With that being said, let's hop into the survey and take a look. Now, the first place we're going to go in the survey to set this up is here in the Look and Feel tab. Now, in here, you're going to want to go to General, either to Header or Footer, depending on where you want the timer to be. In my case, I want it to be at the top, so I'm going to put it in the header. You're going to click Edit in there. You're going to click these two sort of brackets or these two carets for the HTML editor. And then in here is where we're going to type our first bit of code. Now in here, what you're going to want to do is type something like this. So div ID equals clock container. Doesn't like me using tab. You know what? I'll just paste it in here. So you want to do div ID equals clock container, and this should be on the next sort of tab over, but it won't allow me to do that in here. And then div ID equals clock, and then div. Basically, what this does is just allocates a section for where the clock is going to go, so that once we do add the clock into here, then you'll see that there will be this little box where the clock will be contained and what is going into the clock itself. That's going to be our first bit of code. And then our next bit is to add these two script HTML sections. So this is where actual JavaScript is going to go, where we're going to add the clock calculations to make this run as expected. I'm going to save that. And then nothing has changed in the survey yet. The only thing you might notice is that this has shifted down a little bit, and there's been some space allocated here for where our clock is going to go. Now, the next thing we're going to do is if you go over here to layout, cancel, no, might be in style. Yeah, so if you go to style, we're going to add a little bit of custom CSS to actually create the outlines for our clock. So if we click edit in here, I'm going to paste the CSS in here. Once again, I'll include it in the description box below, and then you'll see exactly what will happen once I paste the CSS in here. Alright, so I'm going to paste the CSS in here, and then once I save this, you'll see right here, there's the outlines of our clock. Where our clock will be contained will be in the outlines of this box right here. So I'm going to apply that. Looks good. I don't like the spacing, but I can configure that in a little bit. Okay, so that all looks good, looks great. Actually, you know what, that's fine. And then something to keep in mind is with the CSS, once again, this will be included in the description box below. There's this specific trigger at the bottom. This is important. This is going to come up a little bit later, but just keep that in mind when you're adding the CSS. And then now we're going to go back to general. Okay, we have this. And then here's where we're going to get a little bit crafty and then add the actual JavaScript to do the clock calculations. But before that, what we're going to need to do next is, as I mentioned with the trigger, we're going to need to add something, a variable, which will actually perform the calculations. So let me save this, apply, head out of here. And then actually, let's go back in here. Back to style. And then for this trigger, what I did was I'm setting an embedded data value called start time in the survey, and that triggers the clock to go off. What I'll need to do then is add this start time variable as an embedded data value in my survey flow. So let me save that, head over to the survey flow. So I have this test in here, but I'll need to add embedded data value called start time. Move that to the top. Hit apply, and that looks good. Alright, so now we're going to go back in here. We're going to go to style. That checks out, good. And we're going to go to general and add the actual JavaScript. Now this bit gets a little bit complicated, so I'm just going to post this script in the description box below. Feel free to check it out there. Instead of walking through it line by line, I'm going to go over some key elements that you will need to keep in mind as you're configuring this for yourself. Alright, so I posted the script in, and basically we're just going to do a quick run through of what it does, and then we're going to take a preview of what it'll look like. So in a nutshell, what I did was I set the clock right now to an upper limit of 1 hour. So this value you want to change to whatever time limit you want for the entire survey, if it's an hour, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. And this upper limit is done in milliseconds, so you'll want to consider that as you're changing the time. And then this guy just basically calculates the time currently versus the start time in that trigger I mentioned before in the CSS. We're going to remove that, but that was just to highlight what will trigger the actual clock to get going. But it'll calculate the current time versus started time, and then just do that subtraction and then go down from there. And then you'll see it as the clock starts ticking down. And these are the calculation functions, some showing functions so that this clock shows up as expected. And then all this looks good. Once again, this will be in the description box below. I'll save that. Everything looks good there. Now I'm going to head back to the CSS. And this trigger I'm going to copy. It's not going to let me copy it. Awesome. Alright, I'll just remove it then. Okay, let's save that. Apply. And then that trigger that I highlighted earlier, that will need to be posted on the very first page of the survey to actually trigger the clock to start ticking down. So right now the clock is empty, but once I do add that trigger in there, then you'll see that this clock will populate with 1 hour and start counting down from there. So let's go back into the survey. I'm going to add a blank question. Move to the top, make a text graphic question, add a page break, paste this trigger into the JavaScript in here. Unload, we're going to paste that in here, sets the embedded data as our trigger, and then once that survey starts, we'll see the clock count down. So I'm going to do something like click next to begin. And I'm going to change this, be next, and maybe previous. Perfect. Alright, awesome. Everything looks good now. Should be working as expected. Then once I hit preview, you'll see up here there should be a clock that populates right in. So perfect. Added the clock right in. I guess I changed the positioning from right to left, but now that clock will start counting down the moment the page loads. That trigger's in place, then we're good to go. Now once I click next, going to the next page, the clock still stays there. Similarly, I can answer different questions, and we'll still see that clock ticking down. And just keeps going. And finally the survey ends, and the only time the clock restarts is if you click restart survey in the preview mode, or if someone refreshes the page. Then it goes back to the original time allotted, and then just keeps ticking down from there. Hope that clarifies things. Let's do a quick recap to make sure all the pieces are in place. To start, the first thing you're going to want to do is once you head into your look and feel and then to general, is to decide whether or not you want the clock to be at the header or the footer. So this will decide whether it's on the top up here or the bottom down here. This of course is aesthetic. Most people like it at the top, some people prefer on the bottom, but that part is up to you. Then what you're going to want to do is add this div block for the clock container. It's your very first step. And then you're going to want to add 2 script tags for where the JavaScript is going to go, but you're not going to want to put anything in there yet. And then after doing that, you're going to want to head over to Style, to Custom CSS, create the clock container so that we can actually see the clock, the outlines of the clock in here. And then this you can configure it to be what you want, the border, the padding, the alignment, things like that. And then you can just configure the placement as well. And then once that border is in place, then you're going to want to head back to general to add the JavaScript in here in the script section. You're going to want to change this value to whatever time in milliseconds you want to set. You're also going to want to change, you might want to change this as well, how often the clock is updated, so that in this case it updates every half second. If you want it to update sooner or in a quicker time span than that, or on a slower time span than that, like every 5 seconds, that part you can change in here. And then once you have all that set, then you're going to want to head to your survey flow to add that embedded data value for start time so that you can have some reference point for when the survey starts. And then finally, you're going to want to add a page that's a trigger page with this JavaScript value as a trigger value that actually gets the clock going. That was a lot. If you guys do have any additional questions or concerns or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. Always happy to clarify anything further or go over any additional questions. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you guys again soon in the next video. Take care.